friends. This is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I sit down and talk to other writers and pick their brains, and we talk shop. And I will say in this episode, there's a lot of shop talk going on. But first things first, just a reminder I am now offering through my new company, Unbound Writer, one on one coaching and mentoring, as well as two writing retreats that I'm offering this year in May and October in lovely Boulder, Colorado. So I would love to help you out if you're an aspiring writer, if you're an established writer, just looking for some more inspiration and getting unstuck. Please go to my website, carterwilson.com. There's a link there that says for writers, and then you can read about the services that Unbound Writer is offering. And we're excited that our next venture with Unbound Writer will be online classes, so you can download those and get some teachings that way as well. So today on the show, I had Audrey Gale. So Audrey Gale is the novelist who lives up in or lives over in the Los Angeles area, and we had a lot to talk about. Her second book was released last September, The Human Trial, and it's a novel that's rooted in it's a medical thriller rooted in scientific fact, obviously, and but born from Audrey's personal experiences, which we get into a little bit in the podcast, which is fascinating. And we talk about the responsibility of fiction writing, and how fiction writers can't just hide behind fiction. They can't just say, "Well, it's fiction, so I just made everything up." If you're writing something that necessitates research and facts, you have to you have to be on guard and you have to do your work. And Audrey put a lot of effort and time into her research with the human trial, which sounds fascinating. But yeah, it was a lot of shop talk, just really talking about you know inspiration for writing, and the joy of writing, followed by all the other things you have to do as a writer, which you weren't necessarily banking on. How do you get your voice heard? How do you compete with all the other things in the world that are begging for people's attention? And I say this all the time: writers rarely compete with one another. Writers are competing with your phone. Writers are competing with your TV. So many other things to distract a person from reading a book. It's a lot. It's a lot to try to break through. And usually you need help doing that. So we get into that a little bit. But it was a lovely conversation. She was a wonderful person. I really enjoyed talking to her. This is my conversation with Audrey Gale. And you're in Southern California, right?
Yes, I am.
I grew up in Ventura County,
Oh, did you? Okay.
like in the Westlake Village, Thousand Oaks area.
Oh, nice.
I
Nice.
left when I was 18, and I've been back since, but I lived in the Bay Area for a couple of years, but I haven't lived in the Los Angeles area since I grew up there. So it's a distant planet to me at this point.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a strange planet, no matter where you are. And are you still in the Bay Area?
No, I'm in Colorado. I've been just outside of Boulder, Colorado for 27 years now, something like that.
Ah,
So, and you're in where in California are you?
I'm in Los Angeles area. I'm actually in Brentwood.
Oh, sure. And you've been there for a while?
Oh my gosh, we've been in this house for 32 years.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, we've been here forever.
Yeah, there's something about, like, there's things I love about California and things that because a lot of my friends from high school still live in the LA area, and I go back and visit from rare time to time. And it's just, it just feels different. And I think that's mostly a byproduct of just me being older rather than anything's vastly changed. But when you live somewhere like Colorado for a long time, you go into any place where there's a lot of people and you're like, there's too many people. I got to get out of here.
I am from the Midwest originally. I was born in Chicago, but I was raised in the Milwaukee area.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking the only thing wrong with California when I arrived many, many years ago, Northern California originally and then Southern, is that there's just too many people here.
Yeah.
Even if you would go backpacking in the Sierras, you're never alone. There
Right.
are
Right.
people everywhere. And so I agree with you. There's a lot of people, but when you live in a place, you learn how to get around, how to have alternate routes, what times you should be going where, etc. So you
Yeah.
learn to live with it.
And I do think it's a function of age a little bit too, because even now I'm like, God, Colorado's got too many people. We gotta go to Vermont or something. And I think that's just me getting older and not being necessarily misanthropic, but just feeling like there's just too much human energy around me.
I think, I think there's a point there, Carter, because I feel like as we age, for one thing, we tend to want to express our creativity in some way, whether it's writing or drawing or painting or what you're doing, interviewing people for this show. Um, and that requires a little more thought time. And so just the busyness of life kind of gets in the way of that.
Yeah, yeah. Right. I think you value your periods of focus and recognize your periods of focus more than you did as a younger person. And I think that's true. And, but you also tend to, for at least in my case, I take on more and more things. And now I'm finding like I'm craving that focus, and then I'm too scattered brained to extend it for any kind of long period of time. But we
I
we
know,
all figure it out.
I know how you feel because I really thought publishing a book was a major, major accomplishment, but seems to be just the beginning. And now you have to learn all sorts of technological stuff, and it's a do-it-yourself world out here. So people expect you to do social media and your own marketing and your own PR and oh my God.
Yeah.
It's like that was maybe the easiest part, although who knows.
Well, it's not. And this is exactly the kind of thing I actually teach with my coaching and my retreats, but it's true. I've learned over time that if you sit there and think about all the things you have to do, including writing a book, sometimes I sit there and I'm like, I'm excited by the book, but I'm maybe like at that point 15% in, and all of a sudden it feels overwhelming to me.
Yeah,
It's so important, at least for me, to stay present and stay focused on just today, and in finding the joy in sitting down and what's going to happen in this scene. Or, today I'll do the social media posts, but I'm not going to worry about them. Like I've got to do this and I got to do that.
yeah,
I throw things in my calendar and then I try to just not even think about them until that day comes. I'm like, oh, I guess today I'm doing an Instagram post promoting my new book or something like that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
because if you do sit down and think about all the things that you're expected to do as a writer, in addition to writing a book, which is a major accomplishment, it's completely overwhelming.
Completely,
Yeah.
completely. So I'm
Yeah.
going to start doing what you just suggested. Put things on my calendar and not even look until that day arrives.
And the other thing I find helpful, and I've gotten this advice from my PR team, is just like, especially when it comes to social media, it's like, hey, you don't have to do everything. Find the things that you like to do and find the things that you're good at and focus on those. So for example, like I lean in hard to my like monthly newsletter. I put a lot of time and energy and focus into that. But I'm not posting on social media every day.
No,
So it's just finding those battles. But it does feel like over time, like, how is my voice being heard? I'm competing for everybody's attention, which means I'm competing with people's phones. I'm competing with people's TV viewing, much less other books. Um, so it gets a
yeah,
little noisy in my head.
it's noisy. It's noisy inside your head and outside your head. I can tell you that much.
So growing up in the Midwest, I'm always curious about inflection points. And I've talked to a lot of writers, and just like can you identify those roots? So for example, in my case, I had zero roots. I didn't start writing till I was 33, and I had no background, no interest in it. And it was one of those things that just on one day started happening. Other people, like only child. Books were my only friends. Do you have memories of growing up and being like, I want to be a storyteller, or I seem to be more creative than some of the other kids?
I don't exactly know where the roots began, but I can tell you, in fact, I have it right here. You probably want to see this, my first book. It's very fancy,
Yeah, it is very fancy.
and it's called The Happy Little Mouse,
A
Audrey Gale,
thriller.
from my publishing company in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin.
Yep.
So there was something there. I think I was always a storyteller. I exaggerate, and I have fun with it. I've
Yeah.
always had fun with it. And I did tell my little sister I was going to be a writer someday when I was quite young. And then I have my first book here, which got a B plus, by the way,
Oh.
really hard grader. And anyway, I, so I think in the back of my brain, it was always there. I may have been born with it,
Yeah.
but I did follow a very circuitous route to actually get to, sitting down to write a novel, publishing a novel, doing it again. I'm working on the sequel now to The Human Trial, my medical thriller. So you said something that really caught my attention, which is, do the things you're good at. What I'm good at is writing.
Hmm.
I went back to USC here in LA to get my master's degree in writing, and that ended my thesis was ended up being my first novel. It's a
Hmm.
legal thriller, but not a medical thriller. And so I think it's you found this out yourself, starting at 33 with no background. You learn to write by writing, and people give you feedback.
Right.
Having a writing group or having special people read for you is integral, because you think you've said something, and then people say, "Oh, I didn't understand," or "I thought this," and you realize that you learn by hearing how people hear you,
Right.
you know?
You learn by being curious for sure.
Oh,
And how hard is it though to be a novice writer suffering from, massive amounts of imposter syndrome, and then sharing your work with people who, I remember with my first book, I didn't tell anybody I was writing, much less my wife at the time, because I was embarrassed, and I thought for sure there's no way I'm going to write a whole book. And for sure, if I tell people I'm writing a book, they're going to ask me a year from now, how's that book coming? Um, and actually the first people that I shared it with were agents when I was
oh,
so I mean, so you go straight to like the potentially the harshest feedback you can get.
uh-huh,
But
uh-huh.
it's necessary. All that rejection, man, it's what makes you, I think.
Yeah, I think it's not for the faint of heart, and I don't think any artistic expression is, because it's tends to be very personal. You feel like you're exposing your soul, and it's difficult. It's there's everybody's a critic, and
Yeah.
people don't generally pull their punches.
No, no, especially online because
Hmm.
it's relatively anonymous and it's easy to throw a review out there. And but reviews are good too. I mean, reviews are they you are selling a product that you created, and you want feedback. I mean, or at least I think it's important to have some sense of feedback. I
Yeah.
think what gets a little bit hard is like it might have already been so far vetted, whether you're traditionally published or indie published, whatever, it's gone through it's gone through professionals. And then you have critics saying this book should never have been published. So like, dude,
Yeah, yeah.
but
And you think, oh gosh, I spent how many years sitting alone at a computer doing this, and I shouldn't have been doing it at all, really?
yeah, and that goes back to being present, right? Focusing on like, like I always talk about the why of writing. Why are you doing this? Why did you choose this path? And if you're being very strategic about it, and I want to get published, I want to do this full time, then rejection, I think, is really hard. If you're doing it because you're like, I can't get this person out of my head and I want to write about them. And when I sit down and write, it makes me feel different than I felt the other 23 hours of the day.
Uh-huh.
Then
Uh-huh.
rejection is easier because you're like, okay, well, I'm going to keep writing. It sucks that you rejected me, but I'm not quitting because I
Yeah,
really,
you
I,
haven't killed me yet, right?
right, right. And you can kind of approach things also as a problem solving basis. I think books are problems to be solved. And so there is something about like getting that rejection and learning from it and saying like, okay, I understand what you're saying, and I think I can make myself a better writer if I can objectively absorb these comments
Yeah.
and still be true to yourself as a writer, not to do something that you don't want to do, but that takes a real lack of ego to do that. And that's not easy to do.
I learned in my experience at University of Southern California, I learned how to hear criticism. It
Hmm.
was probably the biggest thing I learned at USC because criticism that inspired in me like an oh my gosh, gotcha moment. Oh, why didn't I think of it? Oh,
Mhm.
that is so interesting. Oh, that's good criticism. That's criticism that is probably valid and something you want to listen to. The criticism that starts with, I don't like this and I don't like that, and I didn't believe, the sort of the shallower, surfacey, what do I do with this thing that you just said to me kind of comment.
Yeah.
Um, those are a little easier to say, okay, everybody has a personal opinion and it may or may not be relevant.
Right, right. And I mean, criticism is an art form. I love, for example, reading really thoughtful movie reviews, even if it's a movie I have no intention of seeing or I haven't seen. I love literary or film criticism just because it's so interesting to see how their minds work. But it's not an easy thing to learn. So if you're in a critique group, for example, as not everybody's great at giving feedback. Especially if you're with other writers, some writers want to tell you like, this is what you should do. And that's not helpful. What's helpful is like you telling me, how did you feel reading this book? How did you react? What wasn't working for you? But I don't want
Yeah,
to know how you would write it because you're not writing the book.
right. And if you're writing it, that means you're spending a lot of time with this subject matter and creating and shaping and reshaping and reshaping. And so it has to be a story that's yours
Yeah.
in your soul, in your gut. Otherwise, you couldn't stand to do it.
Right. Right. Because it's like to your point early on about the huge accomplishment of writing your first book. Writing a book is a lot of work. And it, it's, when you've done a few of them, you feel like, okay, maybe it's not so hard. But when you think about it, like getting that first draft done, I mean, most people who attempt it never get that first draft done because
I,
they're trying to be perfect or they're so full of self-doubt and fear of failure,
yeah.
um, that it's like, okay, well, it's not going to be great. It might not even be good,
Oh,
but you
what
got to
happened?
get the draft done.
Okay, okay.
So tell me about kind of, so you had intention, right? Because you went to USC. And what was your thought process in terms of like, were you thinking about the actual industry? Did you think like, or it's like, I just want to write and we'll see what happens?
Um, well, I loved your comment about curiosity earlier on. Yeah, I have a lot of curiosity, and my personal experiences have kind of led me into this realm of writing, especially my medical thriller, the last book, The Human Trial. Um, my intention with this book was, it seemed to me the universe kept giving me this story. It kept slapping me with this story until I finally realized I have to do something with this story. I
Hmm.
have to. It's the universe is giving me a message, and so I wrote this particular book with the intention of hopefully opening minds and eyes, a little bit about our medical system, what what doesn't work, what's wrong with it, what's right with it, so on and so forth. Because you probably know that we pay more than any other country on earth for our medical system by 2 times the closest
Mm.
next group. But we do not have the most effective medical system. And one measurement being life expectancy, we've been losing life expectancy against the other wealthy developed countries on the globe since 1980 or 81.
Mm.
So we're paying a lot. I think we might be going in the wrong direction because we're not keeping up with the rest of the
Is that
developed.
life expectancy decline? Is any of that related to, violent deaths, gun deaths, as opposed to longevity?
That's an interesting question because I really don't know
Yeah.
how life expectancy was figured in that particular statistic. That statistic did come from a Dr. Abramson, who is a Harvard MD at the
Mm.
medical school. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
it's just health related. I'm not sure. I couldn't really
It's a
tell you.
country that likes to smoke and drink a lot, but a lot of countries do.
And shoot guns.
And shoot guns. Yeah, that's the thing I was thinking about, is like that is purely an American affliction. Um,
It sure is. It sure is. It's so frightening. I think about having kids going to school in this world. Frightening it must be.
yeah, my daughter is a junior now at MSU, but she was at Michigan State, and she was very nearby when the shooting started happening last year, and it was
Oh,
horrifying. And
horrifying.
yeah, you're just like, how is this?
How can
How is
this
this
be in
happening?
our country? How can this be? Yeah.
So I'm curious about, when you're talking about, you have the universe is kind of almost commanding you to write this book. How much of it was, obviously it's a book with a message, but how much of it was like wanting to get that message out versus like, I'm literally going insane if I don't get this on paper because I just have to write.
I had to write it.
Yeah.
I had to write it. I was privy to some experiences and information that that not a lot of other people have been privy to. Um, and it's important. It's really important. It's life or death. It's longevity. It's well-being. It's living your best life, is sort of the bottom line.
Yeah.
Um, and so, as I said, after the universe slapped me for the third time, and it was a very profound experience, um, I thought, okay, I'm a little bit afraid to write it. I'm going to have to learn about things like physics, quantum physics, pathology, medical practices, so on and so forth. A lot. And yet, it just reminds me, and I think you are right here with me, that something that intrigues you or grabs your curiosity and won't let you go, you can learn just about anything you really, really, really want to learn about.
Yeah.
And I was helped along by a friend of mine who's a medical pathologist with multiple labs in the LA area, and let me visit his labs. I had a good friend who is a physicist. I was going to say quantum physicist, but he actually specialized in space physics
Mm-hmm.
at UCLA,
Mm-hmm.
which ends up being about spectrum, that they can tell what materials are out there by the spectrum.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, so the thing that set me over the edge was when my father was diagnosed with leukemia. My father lived in LA at that time as well, and he came to me and had after one chemotherapy treatment and said, "I don't care. I'd rather die. I am not doing that again." So
Hmm.
I said to him, you know, sort of cheekily, um, "If you ask me what I think you should do, I would take you to my vet." And he said, "What?" But my
Hmm.
vet is the one who turned me on to these two scientists that lived in the 20s, 30s into the early 40s, um, who and their discoveries. He was basing his own practice on their discoveries, and I'd seen him perform miracles, which is exactly what it looked like, with my dog.
Hmm.
And so my dad went to my vet with me, and long story short, he made a sound a cassette sound tape for my dad.
Hmm.
And my dad played it all the time and eventually went back to his medical doctors and they pronounced him cured.
Huh.
And they said it was the damnedest case of spontaneous remission they'd ever seen. Well, we're not going to tell him that the vet was practicing medicine, so we didn't mention anything. But the net was he said that sound spectrum is related to the entire spectrum, and he was just taking higher frequencies and translating them into lower and lower um, octaves
Hmm.
until it was in the sound spectrum. Anyway, I saw this miracle and that was it. I'd
Hmm.
seen a couple other miracles and it was just time to start working on the story.
So, I mean, that's a powerful story, clearly. Um, and and I think it's important for listeners to understand, fiction writers can't hide behind the curtain of fiction. If you're writing something that necessitates a lot of research, like your book, you have to do the research. You have to know who who you can trust to provide you with factual information. Because I think some authors think like, well, and sometimes I do that. I don't gravitate writing wise towards books that need a lot of research, mostly because it just is a lot of work for me. um, but I think some people can hide behind, well, it's fiction, it's all made up. I'm like, well, if you're delivering a message, you have a responsibility, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Um, so it sounds like you spent obviously a lot of time making sure you understood what you were talking about before you're delivering this message to the reader.
You have to understand it well enough to explain. And I would say to my physicist friend or my pathology friend, my job is to take all that knowledge of yours and the lingo, the professional language that you use to sort of keep the rest of us out, in my opinion. But
Mhm.
um, take all of that and put it in the plainest English I can muster.
Mhm.
So that this story is not intended for scientists in laboratories, although I
Right.
hope
It's
they
not a
read
white
it.
paper. Yeah.
No, it's intended for you and me and people who like fiction and people who like really good stories and compelling stories and suspense and mystery and murder and
Right.
mayhem.
Right. Right. Well, it's got to be a story first, right? There's like, if it's just a dissertation, it's not going to sell any copies, or
Right,
it'll sell 3 copies. You still have
right,
to have a propulsive, engaging plot with characters that you care about what happens, and it's not just a system to deliver information. And that's
right.
that's not an easy thing to balance, I would think.
It's not an easy thing to balance. And I think what you were saying about people thinking, well, it's just fiction, you just sit down and make it up. For fiction to be plausible and accepted by an audience, it has to seem like it's based in fact. It has to seem like the real world in some way. It has to have some cohesiveness and logic behind it. Otherwise, it's not even an interesting story.
Right, right. And then you have the whole other issue of, you do, yeah, every writer has this. You put your blood, sweat, and tears into however long it takes you to write a project. However long it takes, it's never easy, and you're always exhausted by the end of it. And then in your case, when you have a book that has a very powerful message that you really think is important for other people to see, now it's like, how do I get people to read this book? And I
Yeah.
mean, that's the existential crisis for all writers, right? And whether, however you're published, it's like, it's not easy to get attention. How do you deal with that?
It is a very noisy world, as we've discussed. Um, you just, I guess a friend of mine said to me, you just prepare yourself for the heavy lifting.
Mhm.
Yeah, you, it helps to feel proud of the product that you've produced. And I do. I feel like it's a good, engaging story. the characters are very flawed and very human, and I find that beautiful and attractive.
Mhm.
Um, and the story, it's suspenseful. It's, it's building to this crescendo, and so all of that is really important. Um, and then now the heavy lifting starts. Now the heavy lifting starts after, years of research and writing. Um, Now I'm learning about social media. I'm learning about different aspects of PR and marketing. And, it's just every day is a new challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a balance because, you know, you don't want to be the writer, and we see them all the time, who that's all they talk about is my book, my book, my book, and it gets difficult after a while. You're like, okay, we get it. You wrote a book, and people don't. The layperson doesn't appreciate how much work it is, and nor should they. That's fine. I don't appreciate how much work it takes to make a studio album.
Right,
I just want to hear the music.
right,
Um,
right.
so it's you sometimes you feel like you're just screaming into an abyss, and you're like, okay, that's when you have to go back and just focus on, the being present, focusing on the things that you like to do, and let kind of the universe take care of the work. I mean, you have to put your work in too, but there's a point where you're like, I've I've done everything I can for this book, and now it's time to move on to the next one. And who knows? Maybe 20 years from now, someone wants to make this into a Netflix series. Who knows?
It's really good to talk to you, Carter, because you're so right. You want to be able to control the result, which you can't.
You can't.
And you want to know that you've contributed everything you could and should have. And yet it's kind of an endless proposition. And at some point, you just have to say, the universe is in charge here. I've done the best I could. I think the book is good. Let's hope other people think so too and see where that takes us.
Yeah, and you keep producing. My first three books didn't sell. And fortunately then my next 10 did, but like all I think about is, for for varying amounts of money, some of them very, very small, and but that's okay because I'm like, all right, I've got something else that I want to write about. So I'm excited for that. And I think
Yeah,
that's one of the best things about being a writer, unlike many professions, is the best could always be yet to come.
yeah.
Regardless of your age, you have no idea. You could be 90 and that's when you have a breakout. um you know th- it's true, and you might not want to be pushing for that, but like there's always that hope there.
Yeah, yeah,
Because one thing I've learned in talking to all these writers is it is not a linear path. Ups and downs aplenty.
yeah.
I know people who've had massive best-selling books, and then their next three books floundered, and they're like, should I go back to work? Should I, it's
Get a
and
real
so
job.
I know it's exciting, but it's scary at the same time.
It truly is. But that's part of the creative process is kind of this, there's an edginess to it. There's what's coming around the corner? What am I sensing? What is going through my brain at this moment? What does that mean? Um, it's it's kind of it's kind of a fun way to live, at least for me.
Yeah, and I think maybe we're not spending enough time pointing out the joys of it all, because there's something about the good reviews where people are like, this book made me think in a different way, like, wow, I affected this stranger,
Yeah,
or just people talking about your book, and you start thinking about, like, that just all came out of my head. I made that from nothing, and now people are talking about it.
yeah,
That's very rewarding, as opposed to, I work for this company and I support their mission, vision, values, but they're not mine. I didn't create it. The act of creating is very powerful and very
very
fulfilling.
powerful. I had an experience just the other day. I have a friend who unfortunately is having a big problem with cancer,
Mm.
and another friend of ours, mutual friends, said, that kind of science that you were writing about in your book, uh, is that available?
Hmm.
I said, well, yes and no. I mean, the medical profession is very, very, very touchy about who practices medicine and saying things like treatment and cure. You have to be careful. So anyway, I gave her the sort of the background about
Yeah.
it's you're not going to find it in the yellow pages if they even have them anymore.
Right.
And but I did tell her that there are people who have used the energetic vibrational essence of creation, which means we're all vibrating energy of various
Yeah,
condensation.
everything's on a frequency. Yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly right. There are people who have used that frequency approach to cure disease.
Yeah.
One of them was my vet. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Right. Right.
but so I gave her some ideas about there's companies that make certain kinds of equipment that might be helpful. Anyway, what was the net of that story for me was, wow, those two ladies read my book and this is what they're thinking about.
Right. Right. It had an
Really
impact,
made me feel good.
a potentially life-saving impact.
Potentially life-saving.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
big.
Yeah. It is big. Can you ever think about like, had you ever had you gone to a different vet? like like none of this would have happened.
I thought about that, and it's interesting because lived in San Francisco and I was transferred down by a company that I worked for back in the day. And I was only going to spend a year in Los Angeles. And my best friend and my maybe only friend when I arrived in LA was my golden retriever dog who was 13 years old.
Oh.
And she was very, very ill. She
Hmm.
had like visible lesions. Anyway, it was really horrible. And I went to vet after vet after vet since I didn't have one. And each one of them said the same thing. 13 is a good long time for a dog this size. You should just put her down. And maybe because I was new in LA and I didn't know a whole lot of people yet, I just couldn't. So I just kept going from vet to vet to vet. And one day I sat in my office in downtown Los Angeles and I got out the yellow pages. We had them then, and looked up holistic vet. And there were two, and I called them both. And the first one that could take me was the guy that I went to, and he has made all the difference in my writing life,
That's wild.
isn't it?
Golden is on the chair behind me sleeping, by the way.
Oh, I do see him. Him, her,
Her,
him.
yeah, she actually cut her one of the pads on her right leg yesterday, and I have no idea how. So we had to put a couple staples in it, and now she's a little bit sedated just to keep her
Yeah,
somewhat inactive. So she's
right,
because
right.
she's young, she's 15 months, so she has a lot of
Oh,
energy.
oh, wow. Oh, they're such great dogs. Lucky
Yeah,
you.
it's my first one, so
Oh,
far so good. It's not
yeah.
always smooth, but neither is having kids. So
Well,
well, Audrey,
I've had multiple Goldens
oh,
and
you
they've
did?
all been great in different ways.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've heard that from every golden owner.
Yeah.
Um, well, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a little storytelling ourselves. The making it up portion of the show. I've picked 3 books, mostly at random from my bookshelf. Um, you're going to pick one of those books. We're going to pick a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence in maybe a 2-minute long short story. So I'll read the sentence. You give me a sentence or two, maybe of what happens next, and then I'll do a sentence or two, and then I'll kill it after a couple minutes. And it's always a nightmare, so fear not.
Sounds fun, actually.
It is fun. I've got J.D. Barker's Fourth Monkey, very scary book. Darcy Coates' From Below, and Peg Tire's Strangers in the Night. So choose one of those.
Well, I'm not familiar with any of them
You don't need
personally.
to be.
So, how about the one in the middle?
Okay, From Below by Darcy Coates. So give me a page between 1 and 450.
How about 225?
Okay, and I will quickly scan. What I used to do is make the guest give me a number, and that's the sentence I would read. And then it was just too problematic because a lot of times that sentence was just not great. This is so I'll pick one. So this is the end of a chapter. Um, let's see. All right, we're just going to go with this one. Uh, Only a few had plunged over the ship's edge and into the ocean.
But the rest of us, looking down at the roiling waters, knew that our best chance to survive would be to stay with the ship as long as possible.
We knew it wasn't a Titanic situation. The waters in the Caribbean were not nearly that cold. The issue, we knew, were the sharks.
Exactly. The sharks that were circling our friends that we could see in the water. And there was nothing we could do to help them. We threw out life preservers and tried to haul them back in, but the sharks were getting thicker and faster and more aggressive with every passing second.
I felt conflicted knowing my husband, Jim, was one of those. I was going to file the divorce papers soon after the cruise, but now I just stared and watched. I felt bad for him, really bad, actually. But as they closed in and I saw a red froth start to appear in the water, I wondered if he was one of them.
And then I selfishly realized that perhaps my whole divorce issue had just been solved.
I think we call it there. That's a great little short story.
That was really fun.
Who looks down at sharks circling poor people and be like, huh?
Guess my problems are over.
Well,
Well,
listen,
that's
Audrey,
great, Carter.
it was great talking to you, and congratulations on your recent release. I know it came out, I believe, in September or so, The Human Trial. Is that right?
The late September, the human trial came
Yep.
out, first in ebook, of course, and then a little bit later the print book, and then finally the audio book hit. So they're all out there.
Exciting times, and good luck with the sequel. That's got to be daunting as well, but it sounds exciting.
It is. It's fun.
Great. Nice
And good
meeting you
luck,
and
and
nice
good
talking
luck
to you.
with your career, your writing career, and
Thanks.
your broadcasting career.
I'm slugging it out best I can.
Thank you, Carter. I
All right.
enjoyed it.
Take care. So that's it. That is my conversation with Audrey Gale. And what a deliciously dark little short story we carved out at the end there. It was real short, but it felt like it just had a nice, obvious ending. That was fun. Just a reminder, if you want to check her out, just go to audreygaleauthor.com, and her most recent release is The Human Trial. And while you're on the internet, pop on over to my website, carterwilson.com. There's so many things you can check out there. And if you're a writer, check out what my offerings through Unbound Writer, my coaching, my mentoring, my retreats, and all that good stuff. So it's an exciting time for me as we launch this company and we try to extend our reach to writers all over the country and maybe the world. Who knows? Hey, friends, that's it. That is it for this episode of Making It Up. As always, more episodes will be out soon. In the meantime, take care.